So as I said, I'm going to go into painting the profile, and then if I have some time left over, I'll talk about the next steps for adding additional layers to the eye that's semi-finished. But first thing I want to do is just go through my palette. So it's a little bit different this time. I didn't have quite as many cool colors in this photo, so I didn't really add any blues. I don't think I'm going to need to. So the first color is the titanium white, Naples yellow, raw sienna, transparent red oxide, and see a lot of the raw sienna and the transparent red oxide, so that's what I'm going to start with. So I've just dipped my brush in the medium so that, you know, gives it a little bit more fluidity. So that's my raw sienna. I'm going to add some red oxide to that. A little brown, so I want to add a little bit more pinkness to it, so I'm going to grab a touch of the General Rose Madder. And once again, a couple of things that I'm really thinking about are the value, primarily value, but obviously I want to get close to the right hue, maybe not exact. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Just going to fill that in. And part of the reason why this is in such deep shadow here is because it's in the socket. So a lot of light is not getting to that section, and even when you come right up into the corner where the tear duct would be, that part of the eye socket is a little bit deeper. So we talk about hard edges, firm edges, soft edges, and lost edges. Here's a lost edge. You completely lose where that eyelid is. So when I'm painting that, I wanna show that too. So I'll just take this color and I'll just come right over my line, because I don't need that line in there. And I'll have enough of a line here to show where that eyelid is. So don't be afraid to cover up your lines where they need to be covered. And then there's actually some creases in here that sort of shoot off this way. So just making this section up here a tad darker. It's going to be very helpful. And I'm also kind of losing my line too, so now this is a light value against a dark value. You don't see as much of the line, which is giving it more dimension. The lines really do kind of tend to flatten out the appearance of things. So if something looks flat in your painting, you know, kind of look at this and think about how you can show those differences with value and color instead of lines. Even just looking at the edge, if I just add a couple little strokes there, it's going to start to simulate the appearance of the eyelashes. These are those subtle details that just make the eyes look reflective and moist. So I'm sort of branching off of this, like this is my starting point, and then I'm kind of looking at that pattern of the light and the dark as it moves into the light. You know, same thing with this, like this crease, for example. I'm trying to find where there's really a strong one, something that's obvious, and then use that as sort of an anchor almost for finding some of the other sections. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So yeah, like that, and then that kind of ties me into this, into this. You know, so there's a lot of stuff there, but if you just take your time and you really start looking at the sections, it's not quite as daunting. All right, so You know, the glazing layer is really the layer where the magic happens, I think. All this stuff helps to set up the structure, but it still doesn't look quite natural. In the glazing, you know, what I'm doing is I'm making slight adjustments, and what I'm going to do is try to add a little bit more detail using the couch method. So I'll put the glaze down, basically re-wet that area, and then I'll add some of the finer details back into it. So with this side, I didn't paint any of those little highlights, so I'm going to do that in this layer. But the first thing I'm really going to do too is just reevaluate my color, specifically looking at value, chroma, and hue. So kind of going through that checklist once again. You know, I try getting close, so hopefully I won't need to adjust it too much, but I can see there's like a richer red right here. That's too pale in my painting. And I can see maybe little bits of violet in there, more purples maybe. So that's kind of what I'm gonna be focusing on. And the cobalt violet, incidentally, is a transparent color. It's actually really good for glazing for that reason, because it doesn't have a lot of body and a lot of opacity to it. It's just naturally very transparent. So I'm going to use that as my base, and then I'm going to take a little bit of my rose madder. And the other thing I did here was I just dipped my brush into the medium, and sometimes I'll even create a little puddle of the medium on the side of my palette to make the paint even more transparent. So I'm going to take a little bit of that, and I'm actually going to take a little bit of my ultramarine blue. So kind of using everything that I would use for purple, including the cobalt violet. Just nice even coverage, not too heavy. So I can still see what's underneath coming through, and I don't have a lot of brush strokes showing. I'm trying to make it very even along the whole thing. And that's a little bit more purple than what I want, but I'm going to make the adjustment by painting back into it. Here's where I can just kind of come back in with my small brush and just add some of the subtle details. So now I'm just adding a little bit more reflected light, and I am using a stronger yellow. I'm using my cadmium yellow light because the Naples yellow by itself is just too pale. So it's the cadmium yellow light combined with a little bit of the Naples yellow, and I'm just letting that sink into the wet glaze, and that's giving me a little bit of a stronger chroma color. So when I look at the photograph, I notice that more of the warmer greens are on this side, and this side is a little bit cooler. So as I come around this way, I'm going to vary this, this hue and make it even more blue on this side. And what I love about using this method, the couch method, where I blend the wet color into the wet glaze, is that I can soften all of these transitions. So right now, there's sections in here that look a little bit choppy, but because I had previously glazed this, I can just take an almost dry brush and just kind of tickle these brush strokes that are on the surface. I'm barely pressing as I do this. I'm really just tickling what's on the surface and letting that smooth out and become a very soft, smooth transition as it moves towards the outer edge of the iris. The one thing that you really want to be conscious of is that you're not making everything too much the same. So if you look at each one of these strokes, they're slightly different. The color is different, the value is different, the sharpness or the softness is a little bit different. And you know, that's something that I'm very, very conscious of. I don't want to make any two strokes look the same. So I'm trying to think of as many different ways to vary them as I can. And you know, now looking at some of the really fine highlights, I can see that they could actually get a little bit brighter. So mixing up a slightly different color, something with a little bit more white in it, and just here and there I'm going to pop in a few of those stronger highlights, the ones that just seem a little bit brighter. So right here I have a very, very tight shadow where the eyelid comes right up against the eyeball. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit of darkness there. So now I'm kind of getting to the stage where I'm ready to add these final details that are really very, very subtle. And the whole process has been working from general to specific. So what I mean by that is I start off with the information that's the most obvious, those really big shapes, and I simplify them as much as I can. And then at each stage, I get more and more focused till I finally get to the final details. And the final details would be things, very subtle things, such as the blood vessels in the eyes. So, you know, even with something like that, I want to make sure when I paint that in that I don't make it stand out too much. I don't want it to take away from the general information. And this is something that can often happen if the details are too sharp or too much of a high focus. It will actually distract. It'll take away from other aspects of the picture. So even as I paint something like this tiny little blood vessel in, I'm making sure that the value of that is not too dark so that it doesn't pop out too much. Sort of secondary highlights, not as large as the main highlight there,